Hello 3D printing friends! Today on the BB 3D channel we're going to take a look at a whole bunch of cool things that you can 3D print for Halloween. Stick around and we'll get into it right after this. I'm Brian and you are watching BB 3D. Hi, welcome back. Hey, if you're new here and you're wanting to learn about cool 3D printer upgrades, 3D modeling, and other 3D printing related stuff, start now by subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. Okay, so today we're going to take a look at a whole fun selection of Halloween things that you can print on your 3D printer. The collection that you see here was printed on a variety of printers: the Creality Ender 3, Ender 3 Pro, and Ender 3 V2, JG Maker's pre-release Artist D IDEX dual nozzle printer, Artillery's Sidewinder X1, and Soval's SV01. And if you're wondering how this collection came about, well, my wife, with some help from our daughter, chose a bunch of decorations they wanted me to 3D print. I got link after link after link to a bunch of cool 3D models, but some of them would have needed a fair bit of post-processing to look like they did in their pictures. Mostly painting, along with the sanding and priming and sanding and priming and sanding and priming that comes before it. And of course, they would actually require painting skills, which I'm telling you right now, I do not have. So I mentally filtered the list down to models where I could just slice them, load up some filament, and print. Now most of these they picked, and a few of them I picked, and one of my picks was the Crow. And that's one that I've been wanting to do for a couple of years now, and I am so happy that it's finally done. And it turned out to be awesome, and everybody seems to love it. And we'll talk more about it in a bit. First though, I want to show off these other prints because they're cool too. And I think pretty much every one of these will fit on most 3D printers. And if they don't, you can always scale them down a little bit in your slicer to make them fit. All of these models are free to download too, and links for every single one of these is in the description. So if you see one you like, you can go download it and print it. So let's just jump right in, shall we? First up is Chris Frieze's Jack Skellington pumpkin. And this is a really cool print because you can put a little LED tea light inside and it lights up just like a real jack-o'-lantern. It's a three-piece print. There's the main pumpkin body, the lid, and the stem. I printed a bunch of these in a few different orange filaments. I've got probably half a dozen of them. This particular one is Filamentum Luminous Orange PLA, and I have no idea what the green is that I did the stem in, but that's okay. You can use any colors that you like. Print the parts, drop in a light, and then just sit back and enjoy. Next is the Sugar Cat by Thingiverse user Magnet. This is available as a single color model or a two color model. I printed the two color one on the pre-release version of the JG Maker Artist D, and it took about 14 hours to print. I actually have two examples of this. One is printed in Protopasta Empire Strikes Black HT-PLA and a generic white PLA that I had that came with one of my other printers. And the other one is printed in a CC3D Silk Metallic PLA, and the same generic white PLA as the first one. I think these prints came out okay, and my wife has asked me to print more of them in more traditional sugar skull colors, so that's what I'll be printing later this week. Now I have a couple of prints related to Disney's Haunted Mansion attraction. The first is one of the plaques welcoming you to the ride, and that's "Welcome, Foolish Mortals." This one is printed in two colors by doing a simple filament swap when the printer finishes the background and starts to print the text and the border. So on this one, I also printed this on the Artist D because I wanted to automate that filament swap. Now, if you print this file as downloaded, it's about 1 centimeter thick. Part of its thickness is the base, which you see here in purple, and then the other part is the text and the border in black. But if I had printed it out at the original thickness, it would have taken forever. So Prusa Slicer has a feature where you can cut off the top or the bottom of a model, so I cut the top and the bottom off, and I kept the middle to millimeters of the whole thing. So I have 1 millimeter of the back and 1 millimeter of the text with the border around it. Now, even if you have a single nozzle printer, you can still print this in two colors. You'll just do a filament swap once the printer starts working on the layer with the text. Now you can either set a filament change in your slicer, or you can just watch the printer, and when it starts doing the text, pause the printer, swap out the filament, and then resume printing. And when it's done, you'll have something like this. Now, the second Haunted Mansion print that I've got is this Lithophane of the stretching portraits from the start of the Haunted Mansion ride. If you've never seen a lithophane before, these are actually pretty cool. It's a way to 3D print a 2D picture. Varying thicknesses on the print correspond to darker or lighter areas of the picture. Just looking at it, it kind of has the appearance of a carving, but if you shine a light through the back of it, you can see the picture. Now this one, while small, could be scaled up to print larger if you wanted to. Lithophanes are really thin prints, and I usually print them on edge like this. So I use a brim and the slicer to give it a better chance of surviving all the way to the end of the print process without tipping over. And this is the last of the Haunted Mansion prints that I did for my wife. At the end of the ride, you're warned about the ghosts wanting to hitch a ride home with you, and these are them. These silhouettes print flat, and then they just slot into the stand. I intentionally made these loose so I can just prop them up for display, but then they'll easily come out of the stand when it's time to put the decorations away. Next, I printed this Cauldron by Drazen on Thingiverse. When printed at 100% size, it's actually pretty small. So I scaled it up to 200%, and at that size it makes a good little candy bowl for keeping snacks handy on your desk. Plus it looks pretty cool. Now it prints upside down, so you may want to use supports for the inside. I did, but I think most printers should be able to bridge that gap if you want to save a little bit of time and material on the print. Over here, this little thing is actually a Hobgobbler from the How to Train Your Dragon movies, but it looks so much like a little gargoyle that I think it makes an awesome Halloween decoration. This was designed by Thingiverse user Alsamen, and they actually have a whole bunch of different dragons from those movies, so go check them out if you get a chance. This little witch's cat is by Thingiverse user ParanoidParabola. Printed in Protopasta Galactic Empire Metallic Purple, this model is available both with and without built-in supports for the back of the hat. I chose to print the version which included the supports, which the designer carefully placed so there were just a few points touching between the back of the cat and the back of the hat. When it was done printing, the supports popped off easily and the end result is great. This Cheshire pumpkin by Thingiverse user PolyForge is another one of those prints that looks really great with a light inside. I used a color-changing LED tea light in this one and a piece of white paper to act as a light diffuser, and the effect is really pretty neat. Now, the light I'm using isn't super bright, so in my case it works best in a dimly lit room, but if you've got a bright LED to put inside, it looks great. I printed this in Brad's Orange Glitter PLA from Printed Solid. It's part of their Jessie line of inexpensive PLA filaments, and it's a great pumpkin-y orange color with some subtle glittery sparkles in it. And for every spool of it that Printed Solid sells, they're donating $1 to the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Also printed in Brad's Orange Glitter PLA, this jack-o'-lantern with snap-on faces is a cool concept. Not only are there snap-on faces, there are also snap-on back panels too. I printed the Jack Skellington face for it and a blank back. Some of the back panels have cutouts so you can project an image on the wall behind the jack-o'-lantern. But the tea lights that I use aren't very bright, so that wouldn't work well for me. Now there are clips which print separately and just snap into the pumpkin body, and then you can clip the face and the back on. I thought that was a pretty clever idea. There are also blank faces included, so you can design your own. Next, printed in 3D Fuel's Autumn Orange PLA, this model is called the Binge Watcher's Popcorn Bowl, but it makes a darn fine candy bowl as well. I actually have a time lapse of this one printing. I figured if it was going to take me a day and a half to print, I wanted to see it happen in the coolest way possible. Now at full scale, you'll need a pretty big printer. I printed this on a Sovol SV01, which has a 280 by 240 millimeter bed. I think even if you scaled it down just a bit to fit an Ender 3, it would still hold quite a bit of candy. And it looks great on a coffee table or anywhere else in your home that you'd like to have a candy bowl. And that brings us to the final print, and that's this animated Halloween crow. This is something I've been wanting to make for a couple of years now, and I finally got around to getting it done. This one was printed on the Artillery Sidewinder X1, but its parts should fit on an Ender 3. Now the model is split into sections. There's the tail, the head, the body, and the feet, and they all print separately. According to the description, you're supposed to print these in vase mode, which is sort of possible, but will not yield the best results. I tried a couple of times, and what I eventually decided was that these parts weren't really compatible with vase mode because vase mode is supposed to print in a continuous spiral from the bottom to the top of the model. But some of the parts have sections that won't allow for that, like at the back of the tail, where the feathers start to go in their different directions. There's no way for the printer to continuously extrude filament if it has to jump from one part of the model to another. So I tried a few different things and I ended up with most of a crow, but not quite the way I wanted it. All it needed was a head, so I printed that and then just glued all the parts together for a non-animated one, and this one sits on the mantle. But for the animated one, what I ended up doing was printing the parts hollow with 2 perimeters, which mostly gave the results that I wanted. In addition to using 2 perimeters, I also used a few top and bottom layers on the parts, and with a few carefully placed print modifiers and Prusa Slicer, I was able to leave access holes in some of the parts where necessary. For example, in the head, I included a modifier to not print bottom layers in a circular area. The result is that the printed part had an access hole in it, which means that I didn't have to cut it out after the print was done. And I did the same for the neck of the body, leaving a 50mm hole. I knew I was going to need to mount some electronics in here, but at the time, I didn't know exactly how I was going to do that. At the back of the crow, I wanted to be able to have the battery pack in here, which meant that I needed the tail to be easily removable. I decided to go with magnets, so I needed some extra structure around the edges to glue them in. The magnets make attaching and removing the tail a breeze. And yes, this looks a little rough around the edges. I think that for the back of the body part, a couple extra top layers here would not have hurt. So I've got magnets holding the tail on and the feet are hot glued to the body, and that takes care of most of the bird. But how does the head work? The head has a pair of LED eyes and it has a servo control arm hot glued to it. For the wires to the LEDs, I included inline connectors so that I can plug them in when attaching the head or unplug them when it's time to take the head off and put the crow away. While I had to poke holes for the LEDs after the print was done, leaving this round opening in the part when I printed it made it easy to get them installed. And I'm so glad that I left that 50mm hole in the neck part for the electronics. I designed a part to fit in there with a flange around the edge so that I could hot glue it in place. I also included a cutout to mount the servo and this flat tab that I could hot glue an Arduino Nano to. Once I had the servo LED wires and the battery pack wires soldered to the Nano, I hot glued the Nano onto that tab, and then I glued that whole assembly into the crow's body. When I hot glued the Nano, I made sure the USB port was facing the front so that I could easily plug it in to upload or modify the code. And I have that servo control arm hot glued to the back of the head, and that makes for a nice press fit connection onto the servo, so I can just press the head on and it stays put. To cover the gap between the head and the body, I got some thin black felt and just hot glued it around the edge of the head, and then I cut these little fringes on it. And that's it. The code for this is very simple. I'm using random numbers to set the servo's angle and to determine how many times to blink in between moves. The LEDs blink by quickly fading out and back in rather than just off and on, and I think that gives it more of an organic look, like the glowing eyes or quickly closing and opening again. When I tweeted a short video of the crow recently, I was amazed by how much love it got. Although it would take me a while to make a detailed video about the project, if there's a huge call for it, I'll do it. And if I do it, I'll enlist the aid of friends who are better at 3D modeling than I am to make the project more printable so that others will have an easier time of it. But sadly, that is not going to happen before Halloween 2020, but probably will before Halloween 2021. Well, 3D printing friends, that's about all the time we have for this episode. And now that we're at the end, let's go print something cool for Halloween. Yeah, you too. Hey, real quick before you go, I wanted to say thanks for being one of the super awesome people who sticks around all the way to the end, and thanks for all the likes, comments, and shares, and an especially big thanks to those who directly support what I do. You're all wonderful for doing that, and I really appreciate it. If you liked this episode, a thumbs up would be great, and if you'd like to help support the channel, check the description for ways you can do exactly that. Oh, I've got some other videos here that you can check out too. And if nothing else, please consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. It's absolutely free and it's an excellent way to help keep me making these videos for you. Well, that's it for this one. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time here on the BV3D channel.